Most information in the fitness industry is terrible. In particular, the diet information is terrible. And if you want to see how bad some of this diet information is, just keep listening. Now, diets only work in one way. It doesn't matter what the diet is, they all work exactly the same way, and that's through restricting energy intake. Because the number one thing about all diets is that calories in and calories out is the overriding part of the equation that makes the big difference. It's not the kind of food you eat, it's the amount of food you eat. Now, the biggest problem with diets is not day one of the diet or even day 7 of the diet, it's what happens on day 1 when you come off the diet. Because at some point, you're going to stop eating that way in that calorie restriction because you've lost as much fat as you want to lose, or maybe you've just decided you don't want to be in a deficit anymore and you're going to have to come off that diet. Now, the more restrictive that diet is, the more likely you are to fail during your diet, but also the more likely you are to rebound after it. You see, when it comes to diet, we have a million-year-old survival instinct in our body that's kept us kicking all this time. Let's imagine I need 2,000 calories per day. Now, I don't need to be in a massive deficit to start the fat loss ball rolling. Even as little as 10%, only 200 calories per day, that's 4 apples, that's like maybe 100 grams of chicken or something. It's not a huge amount of energy you need to lose per day. But that 200 calories per day, that's going to get me a kilo of fat loss about every 10 days, okay? So when we combine that with exercise, I can easily get into 600 or 700 calories per day of deficit. And you see very quickly how my 9,000 calories for 1 kilo of fat, I can drop that every 7 to 10 days quite easily with a very, very small deficit. But if I'm in a big deficit, let's say I drop down 500 or 600 calories per day. So now I'm at something like a 25% deficit instead of only a 10% deficit. After a few days of this, my body will start to say, hang on, I'm missing 2,000 calories. 4 days on a 500 calorie per day deficit means that every 4th or 5th day, I've lost an entire day's worth of food. When you repeat that for a period of time, your body will start to send you very urgent hunger signals telling you that you're not only a couple of 100 calories per day down, you're days of food down by the time you've gone through only a week or 10 days of dieting. And that hunger signal, that thing that's kept us alive for a million years, will be so strong that you'll be almost unable to avoid it. And the thing with these deficits is, the bigger they are, the sooner you'll crack. So when you're setting a deficit with your diet, you actually want to make it as moderate and as small as possible so that you can stay on it for as long as possible, rather than go for maximum fat loss in the short period of time, because you will crack if it's very, very extreme. And the problem with cracking on your diet is that your nervous system's always getting better at something. When you fail at something and you fail repeatedly at it, you're getting better at failing. If you're successful at something, you get better at being successful. So when I set myself up on an extreme diet and I lose with the goal of losing a lot of weight and I'm setting myself up for failure, what I'm really doing is making myself better at failing. Then the way the psychology of all this works is that people say, well, I did this diet and I wasn't successful. So then the problem is not that I set myself up for failure and it was a foolish way to set my diet up in the first place, but just that I must need to work harder. The fault must be with me. I must be too weak, too undisciplined, and they make their diet more extreme the following time. And the problem with this is that fat regain is very different to muscle gain. You see, when you gain fat, your fat cells aren't just getting bigger, you're adding to the number of fat cells that you have. As opposed to muscle, you're pretty much born with the amount of muscle you'll always have for your entire life. I can make that muscle bigger and smaller, but I'm only making the muscle cells bigger. I'm not adding muscle cells to them. That's something that only happens in this thing called hyperplasia, which you can get if you want to use growth hormone, but given most of us aren't going to get a prescription for growth hormone, hyperplasia is impossible for us. But fat cells, we can add all the time. And so when I diet down, I don't lose fat cells, I just make the existing ones smaller. But when I gain weight back, because my diet's been too extreme, because I've failed at it, and because at some point I had to go back to eating normally again, I'm going to gain fat cells and I'm going to make the existing ones bigger. And you can see this if you look at the results of things like Biggest Loser. There are a number of studies that show this, is that weight regain from yo-yo dieting actually ends up with proportionally more and more body fat over time as the fat cells grow in number every single time they break their diet. Now, common big name diets, like fasting for instance. Fasting's got an enormous amount of problems with it, but the number one problem that comes with it is that it makes it very difficult to get in adequate protein while dieting. If I restrict the number of hours that I can eat for, it means that all of my protein for the day needs to be eaten in a very small window of time. The thing with protein is that because of the fat contained within it, it's very satiating. In fact, it's far more satiating than carbohydrate. That means that if I lose that period of time at the start of the day, now I effectively need to get 3 meals worth of protein or 4 meals worth of protein in what amounts to 2 meals worth of time. That's very, very difficult. And one of two things will happen. Either you won't eat adequate protein, or you'll only eat the protein and you'll miss out on all these other things you should be eating as well, like vegetables, for instance. Now, this lack of dietary protein means that muscle loss during dieting will be exaggerated. You'll always lose some muscle when dieting down, but when you're not getting in adequate protein, you're going to lose even more muscle. And that creates a problem later on because it means your base metabolic rate will be lower and it makes fat regain post-diet much more likely. Then we get to things like the keto diet or the carnivore diet, and the biggest issue with these is the lack of carbohydrate. Now that means from a training perspective, training won't be very good because you don't have the fuel to train hard during this diet period while you're on this particular diet. But even more concerning is the long-term problem that comes from both calorie restriction and carbohydrate restriction, which has been shown to cause low thyroid levels. Now, your thyroid is the thing that controls your metabolism. And if you've watched any of my other diet videos, you know that your base metabolic rate is responsible for about 50% of your total daily energy expenditure. So if I'm on a ketogenic diet and I'm in a calorie deficit, I'm guaranteeing that the biggest part of my daily energy expense is actually going to be lower than it could be. And again, that just makes fat regain easier post-diet. So again, it's this what's going to happen at the end of my diet becomes something we should be very concerned about because we're setting ourselves up for failure here. This study here shows that total body mass lost was greater on a ketogenic diet than a regular diet. That means that we also lost fluid and we lost muscle, not just fat. Finally, probably the next most popular diet would be a vegan diet, and there are a lot of positives to a plant-based diet. I can find studies that show that there are longevity benefits, there are benefits to other health markers, but one of the biggest problems is lack of micronutrients because we're severely restricting the kinds of foods we bring in. So that means lack of essential amino acids. That means lack of essential fatty acids. It means lack of vitamin D, lack of vitamin E, lack of biotin. There's a huge list of micronutrients that we can't get from a vegan-based diet. So while you might lose weight in the short term, you are setting yourself up for long-term health problems because of this lack of micronutrients. And then we get on to things like the Man Shake. Now, Man Shake's not even a good quality protein powder. I have no problems with protein powder, so I use one rarely. And if you look at the ingredients from the protein powder that I suggest to my Australian customers, and it is only the Australian and New Zealand ones because this protein is not available overseas, it's a very high quality protein. It has 4 ingredients. And then we look at the list of ingredients for the Man Shake, and I can't even count how many ingredients there are. This thing is a processed piece of crap, and it's no different than going and eating a McDonald's burger in terms of the quality of protein it's providing. And then we have what's called VLCD, or very low calorie diets. Over the last few years, these have become more and more popular, with groups like chemists offering these now as a shake-based diet. This is really kind of where the Man Shake came into the market as well as a popular way to follow a chemist-built VLCD diet. The big difference with the VLCD diet that's being exposed by chemists is that it's 800 calories per day. Now, I just want to put this in perspective for you. POWs in World War II in Japanese internment camps were given 600 to 800 calories per day to stay alive. Now, does that really seem like that's a healthy diet to follow? Have you ever seen any photos of people in POW camps, and do they really look how you want to look? If yes, then maybe a VLCD diet is for you. If no, probably steer away from it because it's complete garbage. So I've already spoken about the difficulties with very low calorie, low carbohydrate diets and the problems with your thyroid that come afterwards, but I want to share with you this thing called the Minnesota starvation experiment. The Minnesota starvation experiment was designed by the guy who came up with the food pyramid, so straight away you know that there's going to be some problems with it. They had a 12-week break-in period where people were eating about 3,000 calories a day, and then straight into a 24-week diet period where they halved their energy intake. Now, I just want to point out that 1,500 calories is double what a VLCD diet is. The 1,500 calories a day also was built on a period of time where things were far less automated than they are now. So I would suggest now, if you wanted to replicate this diet, you'd be talking more about 1,000 to 1,200 calories per day, which is still 20 to 25% more than what we're talking about with a VLCD diet. Now, the results of the Minnesota starvation experiment are pretty awful when you read into them. They produced hysteria, anxiety, depression. They saw long-term reductions in BMI, as in the people were never able to achieve a normal BMI again, and the mood problems that came with it, like depression and anxiety, stuck around even when the experiment finished. Now, again, I need to reiterate that these people were on double the amount of calories than what chemists are now saying people should have in these shake-based VLCD diets. So it doesn't seem like a great way to go about things when you look at what the long-term effects were from the most studied diet experiment in human history. So what's the best diet to be on? The best diet to be on is one that includes all food groups, as we're omnivores. Humans are opportunistic hunters. That means we ate what was available when it was available, because food was really scarce up until only a couple of hundred years ago. Humans are social eaters. We've been eating together since we killed our first woolly mammoth and celebrated the hunt with everyone else in the tribe. So the diet you need to pick is one that allows you to eat from a wide variety of sources, as well as in a social environment. If you've got some special diet where you need a $50 supplement that you can't take with you to your kid's birthday party, you're on the wrong diet. Long term, you need to be able to stay on your diet for long enough for it to be effective for you. So if I need to lose 20 kilo, sustained rate of fat loss is about 1 kilo per week, which means I'm going to be on my diet for up to half a year. If you're on a heavily restricted, overly specialized, restrictive diet, have you got it in your head that you can stay on that for 26 weeks? Because if not, that's the wrong diet for you. The diet we're looking for is one that allows me to eat from a wide variety of sources in social environments and in a deficit that's small enough I can sustain being on this diet for a long period of time. And when it comes to diets, it's that final point. You have to be on the diet consistently and sustainably for it to work for you. This is why the crash diets often don't work for people, because the more extreme the diet is, the more things they restrict, the more likely they are to fail. And then they set off that negative cascade and that cycle of failure where all they're doing is repeating that failure over and over and over. So remember, don't take health advice from the fitness industry unless it seems modest. I can tell you now that I couldn't possibly sell this diet advice, because no one wants to be told to eat moderately and eat from a wide variety of sources. They want to believe that they need some special, crazy, restrictive diet, and then I'll be able to sell millions of copies, plus my supplement that I've just came up with. That's how the fitness industry works. Modest, sustained, and consistent is what you need from your diet.